Eskovitz. I'm here to teach Mishlei and Kohelet. We've done a few weeks of Kohelet. We're now going to do Mishlei. And the reason I'm combining the two books is because there's one author for both books, and that would be King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. And he is, as you know, he wrote three great books of the Tanakh. He wrote Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, and then Mishlei and Kohelet. So I'm going to give you a little bit more background on King Solomon, because great people are usually misunderstood, and they need to be examined carefully. Okay, so King Solomon had a wonderful father named King David, and if you were to look in Kings 1, in chapter 3, you'll see that after King David had reigned for 40 years, he now turns over the kingdom to his son Shlomo. And Shlomo, we are told by the commentators, is only 12 years old. He's in a very challenging situation at age 12 to take over. And he is going to be asked some very difficult things. And if he answers properly or reacts properly, he will have the backing of the Jewish people. So one of the famous stories that you know about is at age 12, as the king, he's asked to be king and judge. And the most famous case probably in Tanakh is when two women claim to be the mother of a baby. What makes the case unusual is that they have no witnesses whatsoever, nothing in writing, nobody to guarantee which one of them is telling the truth. And each one claims to be the mother of the child. And in the presentation, we find out there were actually two babies. One died, and one woman says the other woman stole the baby from her while her living baby was while they were sleeping, and therefore there's a serious problem. So King Solomon has to make a decision that will earn him the respect of the people, and prove that he is a worthy follower of King David. And among the things he has to do is to build the holy temple, the Beit HaMikdash. And will the people even give him the confidence to do that? And so many historians point out that for the first time in history, a decision was made that was absolutely correct, without any witnessing, without any evidence whatsoever. And according to some historians, it was the first time that psychology proved the correct answer to the problem. And just to remind you, there are two women, one living baby. Each one says, I am the mother. And King Solomon does something that would make you proud if you ever studied Gemara or Mishnah. And he says something which is clearly a ruling, that if two people are arguing over something that they found, this is in Bava Metzia, so the ruling is, since it could possibly be that they both picked up this object at the same time, we divide the object in two. It's called Yachloku, and there are many times when this situation is absolutely correct, that two people really may be the correct owners of a mitzvah, of something they find. However, when you decide to divide a baby in half, it doesn't work so well, because the baby isn't going to live. But King Solomon, using his innate brilliance, says, let's divide the baby in half, and each woman gets half a baby. Well, something unusual happens at this point, something that he knew would happen. One woman said, no, don't do that. I don't want you to kill my baby. I'd rather give the baby to the other woman. Okay, that's impressive. The other woman says, no, it's fair. Half and half. We'll divide the baby in half, and this is as fair as it could be. So King Solomon says, we can tell immediately that each woman proved who the real mother was. The real mother would never allow the child to be killed, divided in half. And the other woman who wants to divide the baby must have a grudge against the woman who is the real mother. So with that situation, King Solomon makes his name in history, and the people are going to really respect what he is doing. Now, in the writings of Kohelet and Mishlei, King Solomon reminds us that it's very easy to make a mistake. It's very easy to lose the confidence of the people. And in fact, one of the things that he knew he was chosen to do was to build the Holy Temple. And people expected him to begin the construction immediately at age 12 when he becomes king. And he delays that construction for 4 years. And he doesn't begin the building of the Beit HaMikdash until he's 16 years old. And the people are angry. They don't like the fact that he has held up such an important thing, something that King David wanted to do. They are very angry that he did not start until he's age 16, 4 years later, at which point the people are beginning to question, is this the man they want as their king? And so King Solomon decides that he's going to convince the people that he's very serious and he's going to begin immediately. And what he does is he takes the people back to a Givon where the Mishkan stood. And there he wants the people to see the way Moshe Rabbeinu did the sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness. And he is going to offer 1,000 korbanot that day. And the thinking is that the people see that he wants to get back to the original days when there was an altar, a mizbeach, and a mishkan. Then they know he's very serious, and so therefore he takes the people there, and that's where they will bring their offerings. It's important to know that at this stage of time, Jewish people who wanted to bring offerings did not have to go to the sanctuary, to the Mishkan. They were permitted to build what are called bamot, private altars. This was permissible. It was a good thing to do. It was permissible. It would be forbidden once there was a permanent house of God. And people were actually offering sacrifices in their backyard or on the roof of their homes. But God wasn't happy with that. That was not what God had in mind. So it was time for Shlomo to begin getting the people to back him and to build an edifice that would make everyone very proud. And that was going to take 7 years. And he also had his own palace that he was going to build, and he was going to take that much longer for that because he wanted to complete God's temple as quickly as possible. Okay, now everything is good. He can't get into too much trouble except for one problem. He decides to get married at age 16, and he chooses somebody that does not meet the approval of the people. And the person he chooses, who he loves very deeply, is the daughter of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And this was a mistake on his part. In part, he was trying to bring a world of peace. He wanted to set up political alliances so that everybody would allow him to build the Beit HaMikdash during a time of peace. And that was his hope. But the people were very, very disappointed that he had married out of the faith. Now, of course, he converted her, but it wasn't the best kind of conversion, and so he is going to have to work through some shaky beginnings. Okay, so the one last comment on that, and that is the rabbis say that had King Solomon's teacher been alive at that point, he would never have even thought of marrying, if for any reason, political or otherwise. He would have never broken any rules of marriage. But his teacher, who was named Shmi ben Geber, was no longer alive, and he did with something that was going to haunt him for the rest of his life. Okay, so keep in mind that as we read through Kohelet and Mishlei and everywhere else in the Tanakh, we're going to discover nobody has a perfect record in terms of spirituality. King Solomon will remind us there's no person who ever hit 100%. And if you remember your Chumash, you'll see Moshe Rabbeinu got into trouble many times. And so did everybody else, including Father Abraham and Mother Sarah. Everybody, even the great prophets, somehow could not hit 100% in their spirituality. And it's important for us to know that, because if we ever get to the point where we believe that we had an ancestor who really was perfectly righteous, we would be in great danger of ancestor worship, which the Bible does not like. And every other nation ended up doing that. We were to avoid it. So the Torah comes down hard on people who are very spiritual, who make mistakes. So to remind us not to ever think that human beings can be perfect. Okay, so now let's go back. We're looking on page 1593 in Proverbs, and this is we're looking at the end of chapter 16, verse 32, and this statement is going to be found in Pirkei Avot. Okay, and you'll see that most of Pirkei Avot, which we read for inspiration, comes from either Mishlei or from Kohelet. So here's something that we find in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 4. It says, he who is slow to anger is better than a strong man, and a master of his passions is better than a conqueror of a city. Okay, so here we are told that anger is one of the big failings in human beings. Anger is a very bad trait, and we know that Moshe Rabbeinu got into trouble because he got angry when he struck the rock. Some would say perhaps when he broke the tablets, he also got angry, depending on whether you read from the Jerusalem Talmud or the Babylonian. And the point that we should learn is control anger and be in control of every other emotion that you have. Okay, so so the point that King Solomon is saying is that if you want to be a great hero, if you want to be someone who is considered a great warrior, you have to conquer yourself before you conquer the enemy. You are your own enemy. And I think there's a famous comic that said, or in the newspapers, we have met the enemy, and it is I. Okay, so, all right. So that you might ask yourself a question, but isn't there ever a time that we should show anger? After all, if a child is running across the street into traffic, don't you have to be angry so the child will never do that again? And our rabbis explain that you are permitted to feign anger, to look like you're angry so as to discourage a child from making a terrible mistake, but you really mustn't allow yourself to become angry to the point that you're out of control. Because when you're out of control, you can do some very terrible things, and our religion is very much opposed to being out of control, or as the rabbis say, he who loses his temper is no different than a person who worships idols, because an idolater is out of control. And when a Jewish person loses their temper, they can do anything and everything without realizing that it's a terrible thing to do. Okay, having said that, again, King Solomon will remind us in all of his books that the best place to be is in a place of quiet and peace. And chapter 17 verse starts off, better a dry piece of bread with peace in it than a house full of contentious celebrations, which means that sometimes we go to programs, we go to celebrations, whether within the family or within the community, and very often there are people who will be very contentious, very aggravating, and no matter how beautiful a celebration it is, when people aggravate you, you really don't enjoy the experience. However, if you have a simple experience, if you just have a simple meal of dry bread, and it's peaceful and everyone is kind, that is a much better level of spirituality than being at a large feast where there's a lot of hard feelings. Okay, that's a very important concept. I know we applied in the synagogue when we come to daven. We don't want anyone arguing. We don't want anyone claiming that they know what right from wrong. We want people to just daven in peace and not demand that we change the rules because that's what they did in their community. Okay, that may seem strange to you, but I'll tell you what used to bother me at Turo Synagogue. We used to fill up the shul on a daily basis with visitors who would come spend a week. Many of them were from the Lakewood Yeshiva or from Muncie and the Satmar Hasidim. They would all come, and when we would be doing the davening, very often in the middle of the davening, our learned visitors would yell, "You can't do that. That is forbidden. It's a forbidden activity." And of course, they didn't know what they were talking about, but they enjoyed saying, "We know what's right and you know what's wrong, and therefore you have to stop doing this because it's against Jewish law." In case you wanted an example of that, when we did this a prayer for the sick, we did at Turo Synagogue what is done here in our synagogue. We would do one prayer for many, many people. That would include men and women. And the people who were coming in, usually from Brooklyn, were yelling that we had to make separate prayers for each one. Well, they're entitled to their opinion, but they got very noisy about it and were very disruptive. And week after week, the same people who really didn't know much about Jewish law were interrupting our davening because they knew better. And in the end, I decided I was going to actually do that. I was actually going to divide the prayer up between men and women because I was tired of having people yelling and screaming, "You can't daven that way, it's wrong, you don't know what you're doing. We from Brooklyn, we know the rules better than everyone else." So eventually I simply decided I didn't want all the commotion. I prefer the dry piece of bread without all the fighting, and we actually would do two prayers, one for men, one for women. Okay. The next thing I would point out to you is in chapter 17, verse 2, where it says, "An intelligent servant will rule over a shameful son." Okay. What does that mean? Well, I think we need an example from the Tanakh, and the example would be Father Abraham had a servant named Eliezer, who was a very big tzaddik, and he was the one who made the shidduch for Yitzchak and Rivka. And it was a very successful shidduch. And he was trusted by Abraham more than his shameful son, meaning Yishmael, who was actually expelled from their home. It's mentioned in the Chumash. Sarah Imenu was very unhappy with the way Yishmael was acting. And although he was a son to Abraham, and not to Sarah, but a son to Abraham, he was evicted from the home because his behavior was shocking. And in the end, if Yitzchak had not been born, I think the follower of Abraham would have been his servant Eliezer. Okay, it's good to know that. Verse 3 says, a refining pot is for silver and a crucible for gold, but Hashem tests hearts. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that if you want to prepare silver, which comes out of the ground, or gold, it doesn't come looking as good as we are used to it. It has to be refined. It must be. We must remove the sediment from the silver and the gold, and that creates something really beautiful that we can appreciate. But when it comes to human beings, the way we are refined, the way we achieve our highest potential is by being tested. Hashem tests hearts. Okay, now what does that mean? It means that we may not like it, but where everybody is going to light Hanukkah candles the same way, the same night, what really becomes the spirituality of the moment, or of any moment, is facing a challenge and passing the challenge. Hashem tests hearts. That's okay. Now, this may explain why, when we talk about the great forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the Talmud says that the greatest of the forefathers was none other than Jacob, Yaakov, or Yisrael. The question is, how could that be? We all know that Father Abraham discovered the religion. He discovered God. He created the mitzvot that we follow, and circumcision. And Yitzchak becomes a korban. And how is it that Yaakov is considered the highest spirituality? Well, I believe the answer is in what King Solomon says. We know Father Abraham was tested 10 times, and they were very difficult tests. And we see that Ishmael was also tested many times. Many things happened with him that were uncomfortable. But Father Jacob was tested on a daily basis, not just 10 times in his life, but every day with his brother Esav was a very difficult thing, because Esav hated him with a passion. And later on, when he goes to search for a wife, his father-in-law Lavan is going to torment him and cheat him left and right. And then finally, when he has a beautiful Jewish family, his children are going to kidnap Yosef and send him into slavery. So he was facing terrible challenges on a daily basis, and yet his faith in God never wavered. So that really is the test of where we are. How do we deal with challenges? Are we able to say this is God's will and let's keep moving, or just simply give in and say maybe it's time to stop? Okay. So furthermore, look at verse 5, which says, one who mocks a pauper insults his maker. One who rejoices in another's misfortune will not be exonerated. Okay, let's find out what that means. It is the nature of human beings to like to look down on people. We see this in politics. We see this every day, where certain groups will belittle other groups in a terrible, terrible way. And it seems that throughout history, people who have had advantages tend to look down on those who are less advantaged. And so what mistake this is that people forget that God made people as people, and if a person is a pauper, meaning they're poor and hungry, when you look down on that person and mistreat that person, you are actually not really mistreating a person, but you're insulting God at the same time. So this is what people need to know, and they rarely do. They just feel a need to be superior at another's expense. And of course, the worst example is mentioned in Pirkei Avot, where one humiliates somebody in public. This attempt at humiliation is the gravest of sins. It's as if you kill the person. So we must be aware never to look down on people, because if by so doing you insult the Almighty. And if you should rejoice in somebody's misfortune, even though you feel they deserve it, that person will not be held innocent. That person will be chosen. Okay, and this is mentioned in Pirkei Avot in the 4th chapter, that people really need to realize that we are not to take joy in other people's misfortune, and we are to regret that people made the mistakes they make in life, but in no way should we feel this gives us a right to look down. And I think I may have given the example when Haman is asked by the king Achashverosh to put Mordechai on the king's horse, and Mordechai says to Haman, "You'll have to get down on your hands and knees so I can get on the horse because I've been fasting." And as he does, he kicks Haman, and Haman is very insulted. And he said, how dare you belittle me like this, kick me? Your religion says you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So how dare you kick me and mistreat me? And Mordechai's answer in the Talmud Megillah is, we love our neighbor who acts like a neighbor, but you have been trying to destroy me, to kill me and the Jewish people. I have no respect for you, so I feel I've done the right thing by giving you a kick. Any questions from the viewing audience? Anything? You look like you're alert and awake. Anything? Any clarifications? No? Oh, that's wonderful, I think. Okay, what about the Mickey Mouse group that's over here? Any questions? You're too kind. You're too kind. Okay, so so with each thing we see what King Solomon feels is good or bad. Okay, so one of the things I mentioned last week that I think is important because it's a concept throughout the Torah, and that is, I'm looking for the verse, and that is when you become a guarantor for another person. Okay, you heard me mention it last time. I usually look at the Hebrew, but I'm now looking at the English. And what that says is as follows. When you may recall in the first few lessons, you heard me talking about King Solomon saying 2 is better than 1, and about the spirituality we hope to achieve when we are acting together. However, he says there is a danger in being overly trusting of people. And when you want to do a big mitzvah and somebody says, could you be my guarantor to pay in case I don't? And you want to be a good person and say, well, of course, I will sign the papers that I will guarantee the loan is repaid. That, King Solomon says, is a big mistake. It may be a big mitzvah on your part, but you don't understand human behavior. Too many cases in the Shulchan Aruch are about business partners where one says to the other, "Trust me, I will take care of it, and I'll pay you back." And as you may have heard, even in recent times, it's an ongoing problem. We trust the wrong people, and they cheat us, and that is very unfortunate for them, but for us as well, because once we've been cheated, we start to lose our confidence in being good Jews to one another. We start thinking any time we do a good thing, it will be against us. So these are part of the things that King Solomon wants us to know. So very quickly, he's reminding us that it's better to have a quiet place with good friends than a lot of entertainment where everyone is arguing for position. And he says, remember that the greatest test of all is when God tests our heart, and meaning there will be disappointments, but we're not supposed to let the disappointments ruin our connection with Hashem. And there are times when we're being foolish, when we're trusting the wrong person. Okay, I think by next week, I'll do one more section on Mishlei. That'll be chapter 18. And then I'll get back to Kohelet. Okay, I want to wish everybody a very happy Hanukkah. Please feel free to tackle me if you see me outside and ask any questions. I'm happy to do that. Or you can call me on the phone. But I thank you for your patience. And I want to wish you all a lovely day and a wonderful Hanukkah. Thank you.
And to you also.
Thanks.